I want to tell you how pleased we are to have Christopher Gorgon with us today. He is passionate about unleashing the potential of people who have bold ideas for positive societal change. Through this passion, he helped found Bull City Forward and Queen City Forward and Hub in Raleigh, community development organizations focused on incubating and scaling high-impact societal enterprises right here in Durham and, as you've heard, across the state. This work complements Christopher's role as a fellow at the Center for the Advancement of Social Entrepreneurship at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University, as well as his position as Innovator in Residence. I would aspire to have such a title, Innovator in Residence at the Center for Creative Leadership. We hope you read Christopher's recent column on early childhood, which was part of his bi-monthly series on social innovation that he co-authors for the Raleigh News and Observer and the Charlotte Observer, titled Doing Better at Doing Good. So Christopher, I invite you to come to the panel and you'll introduce our local panelists. Help us transition from this larger national economic view right down to the boots on the ground impact of investing in early childhood right here in our community. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everybody. It is great to be here, and Laura, thanks for the introduction. We are going to try and now get us very grounded in what's going on within the Durham context, so we're going to try and have as lively of a conversation as possible. And what I would love to do also is just to point out the fact that we do have a lot of the local leadership here that's going to be able to make this possible by all of us rolling our sleeves up. We've got leadership that I've seen across the room from the County Commission and the City Council. We also have leadership, of course, from our universities, from the Duke team to the NC Central, North Carolina Central University team. We also have some fabulous service providers that are here, East Durham Children's Initiative, among others, that are really driving this work going forward on the local level. A number of folks who are actually delivering early childhood education. Unfortunately, Kara couldn't join us today, but she will be represented, I think, by a number of other folks here. We've got the faith community here, which is obviously another really important piece of this pie, and then the business leaders. And we've got a cross-section of folks here joining us on the stage to talk about what are the implications for early childhood education, not only here in Durham, but also statewide. So I'm going to sort of introduce them. You've already met Dr. Duggar, who's going to be joining us for the conversation. To his immediate left, we've got Harold Sellers. He was formerly the board chair of the Durham Partnership for Children and is the current secretary of the North Carolina Partnership for Children. He's also a member of the Governor's Early Childhood Advisory Committee and also was a retired executive within Mechanic and Farmers Bank. So Harold's great to have you here. To his immediate left is Patrick Hanna, who is a business leader here in the community. He is working in government affairs with Liberty Mutual. He's also a member of the Durham Partnership for Children board. And then to his immediate left is Alexandra Forter-Sirota. She's the director of the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center, so she's going to be able to bring to this conversation a little bit more about the landscape of the North Carolina economy and the budget and how that has an impact on early childhood education. And then to her immediate left is Michael Goodman. Many of you know Michael through his great work with Capital Broadcasting and really responsible for helping to lead a lot of the work that we see around us here in American Tobacco. He's also helping to drive the entrepreneurship and innovation economy with the opening of American Underground, and it's really just been an outstanding business leader in this community. He also shares a time every Saturday morning with our kids at the YMCA soccer fields, where we both have a chance to get out and run around a little bit. And it sort of represents sort of where our hearts are and the fact that we both have we have kids here in the Durham system and obviously care a lot about their future. So what I'd like to do is I'd actually like to start with you, Patrick, because I want to bring it into sort of a personal level and basis, talking a little bit about your own personal story, why you're committed to this, and if you could sort of kick us off into grounding this into reason why all of us should be in this process.
Absolutely. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
I think that's a commercial. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for the kind introductions. I guess it doesn't really matter where you sit on the panel. You still sometimes get asked the first question.
You can run, but you can't
hide. But I am delighted to be here again. I have seen this organization grow in many directions over many years as when I served as Vice President for Governmental Affairs for the Greater Durham Chamber of Commerce. I've advocated for the organization. When we had a child who was born extremely early, I became a consumer of some of the services of the organization. And now as a regional executive, I'm honored to be on the board of directors. So my experience and transition to this stage today has seen the organization from various perspectives. And I couldn't agree more with the remarks earlier today from our keynote speaker. You know, the future of our community depends on our children. And for our experience, my wife and I had a child who was born 14 weeks prematurely several years ago, 1 pound, 13 ounces. We were in the NICU for half a year. When this child came home, he had oxygen tank with him. It was about 5 pounds, 11 medications a day, 4 doctor's appointments a week. So our experience for our first child was pretty devastating. I tell you that story to say that when you have a child that early, you have no idea of what the early intervention impact on that child's life will be at that moment, because you're fighting to keep the child alive. And so we begin to just understand the impact just from our own story, but what about other families that don't have the resources, that don't have health care, that don't have jobs or the flexibility? Here's a child who comes home who has all these appointments just for the health care, but also had a need for occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, feeding therapy. And so someone has to take this child to these appointments. So what does the single parent do who doesn't have the flexibility on their jobs to take their child, who may be typically developing, may not be, to deal with some of these challenges? So that story is shared for the factor of focusing on the future of Durham. Based on our experience, we want to make sure we continue to advocate for early childhood education. It's made a difference in our lives, and we want to continue to support the Durham's partnership. So that's why we're here.
Okay, terrific. Patrick, thank you very much. So now if you could pass that mic over. Alexander, I'd love to get your perspective about maybe why you're personally in and invested in this, but also from the statewide perspective, we're going to start getting into the fact that North Carolina really has been at the forefront of this work, as Dr. Duggar has mentioned, but over the course of the last few years, we've seen it slip. And I'd love to get some perspective on sort of where we are right now in terms of the current landscape from both the budget and economic perspective as it impacts early childhood.
Great. Thank you all for this opportunity to be here today to talk with you. I think personally, for myself, I'm a Durham resident. I have a child, I'm expecting another child, who benefits tremendously from the strong early childhood system here in our state, and I think really personally have seen the value of what happens when you have those early learning experiences and get to benefit from that as a family. In my role as a researcher and a policy analyst, I'm here more to talk about the state budget and sort of the role of early childhood in our communities and in our economy. I think, as Dr. Duggar said, North Carolina is, really has a legacy in this area, really has built up a reputation nationally as a community and as a state that has recognized the importance of early childhood, that made investments very early on to build a system that really was aimed at addressing a very important issue, which was an achievement gap that began as early as kindergarten, and really recognizing that we needed to start as early as possible to make sure that all children have the opportunity to learn and achieve and succeed. And that benefits not just those children, but all of us. And so the way North Carolina has approached this has really been designing a system that's focused on all children, all communities. We have a wonderful Smart Start system that's been present in 100 counties, serving all children as part of its mission, and making sure that not just children are served, but families have those tools, either through literacy skills, through access to health care, those sorts of additional services to really make sure the child and the whole family is developing and growing together. Part of the work of our system has been that broad-based approach and making sure that all children benefit. And I think the additional impact of adding in the STAR licensing system for our child care really made sure that we were committed and demonstrated that high-quality child care settings was a critical importance to the early learning experience. And then in turn, recognizing that while it's important that all children have access, that we make available to all children these services, that we also need to do more if we're going to really move the needle on the achievement gap to target those children who are at risk. And so making available a strong child care subsidy program that provides support to low-income families so that they can access early childhood in their communities. Making sure that we have a pre-kindergarten program for at-risk 4-year-olds. You know, originally started as More at 4 in the early 2000s, recently has changed to NC Pre-K in terms of its name, but continuing to focus on that critical 4-year-old period when children are developing and preparing for school. So I think there's no doubt that our system remains a national model. I think what we've begun to see, however, in the state is a real challenge in meeting the funding needs and demands in our communities. So not only have we seen the population of under 5-year-olds grow over the course of the Great Recession, it's grown by almost 2.5%, continues to grow. We've also seen our poverty rates for children under 5 increase, and so now nearly 1/3 of our children in the state who are under the age of 5 are living in poverty. So just significant demand for early childhood services, and early childhood services that are delivered really with the intent of, again, preparing children for school. I think we've all heard about the economic benefits of early childhood investment, so I'm not going to go over that. You know, this idea of we invest now and the $10 return is an important one, but I also think for children in poverty, it's particularly important to think about what's happening in those early years. And those early years are where we know that toxic stress, the challenges of living in poverty are really literally built into the architecture of a child's brain. And what is happening through early childhood services is that you're providing that consistent caregiver relationship, those supports through the community that really can minimize the negative effects of a life in poverty and really catapult these children, not just through to kindergarten, but on, as we've heard, through to better improved outcomes by 3rd grade. We know that our own early childhood system has actually been demonstrated to close the achievement gap by 40%, significant evidence that this is working. And so given the demand, given the fact that we're seeing rising poverty, given the fact that we know this works, I think it's most distressing for me to see that we're walking away from this investment. And we've walked away over the course of the Great Recession. We've seen our investment at the state level decline in early childhood programs by nearly 30%. And that's had impacts. The cuts to early childhood systems, the changes to the way the early childhood system is designed have implications for how effective those programs are. And so the budget impacts range from everything from affecting the quality of care. We're falling in terms of our national reputation, not just in terms of access and resources that we commit to this, but in terms of reputation. I think we also have seen immediately the loss of jobs in the early childhood sector. That has a ripple effect throughout the economy, not just for children who've lost their consistent caregiver, but for those families who probably have children of their own. And so the impacts of these budget cuts have been significant, and I think are one of the primary places where we as a community really need to speak up and say the direction is really forward investment and not backwards to a time when we did not have this system in place. So
great. Thank you, Alexandra. Yeah. So Michael, I want you to come in from the business perspective. We've had some good conversations now about return on investment. To underline some of the key issues that Alexandra was just talking about and that we've heard today, for those of you who sort of didn't catch all of those facts, we right now have had a 50% reduction in funding to Durham Partners for Children, 50% since 2000, right? At that same time, we've seen a 20% increase in the number of kids in our community and 26% increase in poverty, right? So if you just think about that, right, increase 20% in terms of total numbers, 26% in terms of poverty, yet a 50% reduction in the actual investment by the state in this, in Durham. What's the responsibility of the business community here? What is the responsibility of us as citizens as we think about this? If you could speak from both a personal perspective and from a business perspective, that would be great.
Sure. So first of all, Chris's team is really good at soccer. They ran over our team, apparently, from what I understand. We're going to be checking some birth certificates pretty soon. So I'm watching. Here's a very basic concept with a very true and very definite return on investment, which is a company cannot be successful unless the community in which it operates is successful. That's a very easy concept, and it holds true for every business. Right? I don't care how much money you make. I don't care about how big of deals you do. If your community is not successful, you are not successful, and that's a very basic concept. Now, I find it really interesting that if you watch what's going on at the state legislature and in Washington, for all the pro-business talk we have, we certainly don't understand what a return on investment is. Pro-business, reduction in taxes, but we've come up with this really interesting new word, which is disinvestment. Right? What is the return on a disinvestment? Can anybody calculate that? Is it infinite or is it zero? If I disinvest in something, I'm not going to get a return out of it. So our strategy has been we're going to reduce what we're going to be willing to provide to those who need it most. And that's not just early childhood, that's across the board. But that's a really disheartening and a very scary thing. Because if you want to talk about a budget, and I love your analogy how you look at a budget, right? Early childhood ain't the problem in our budget. We got a lot of other problems to work through before we get there. Yet, those are the things we like to focus on because, well, we compartmentalize and we demonize and we blame other people very well. But, you know, if you look at it from a private perspective, and I don't really want to be a bummer all day today, but I kind of talk about corporate citizenry as a lost art. Right? We've lost what it means to be a corporate citizen. If you go back 10 years, 15 years, there was a group of companies and big companies who were in it together. Bill remembers those days, don't you, Bill? Right? You needed something done, you had a group you could call, and you knew you could get it done. Why is that not happening today? Where are the large businesses and their efforts to help make changes in our community? And why are they not willing to stand up? And why are they not willing to stand out? It's because, and I've heard this from an association we know pretty well. We don't want to make the legislators mad. We don't want to be mad at us. Well, screw that. Come on, I mean, we gotta be willing to stand up for what we know is very true and very right. And early childhood is undeniable. There is no argument about it. There is no argument about it. So if we're not willing to invest in it, what are we willing to invest in? One thing I say when I get really upset, I say, you know, for all the bad talk we want to do about our public education system, I submit to you that it is us who's failing the public education system. If we can't deliver kids ready to learn, then we're not going to be able to teach them. right? Now, it's a double-edged sword, I get that. But we need to get our minds around that. We got to get our minds around that it's not just going to magically happen when a kid shows up at 5 and everything's going to be okay. If we can't handle 0 to 5, it doesn't matter what we do in public education. We're not going to get over the hump. That's what I got.
All right, Reverend Goodman. Mel, we might have to bring him into Watts Baptist Church and get up there and, sing from the rafters here. All right, so Harold, bring us on home here in terms of talking about this with regards to where are we going. So you are well aware of the state landscape. You've served on the governor's committee, and you also are deeply familiar with sort of what are the key issues around the state. We've seen this disinvestment. I would be very curious about your perspective on where we're going, what the hopes are, what the challenges are, and what we need to be thinking about as we go forward.
Well, let me first say good morning, and I apologize. My voice may go out before I finish what I'm saying, because this is a matter that's been near and dear to my heart for a little over 20 years now, seems like. What, 1990, 91. Where are we going in North Carolina with, I guess, in spite of all of the cuts, all of the fussing and fighting in the legislature, all the threats that we're going to just totally dismiss Smart Start. Again, folks, that was on the latest legislative agenda to just do away with it. I still see the light at the end of the tunnel. I see prosperity down the road for kids in North Carolina, because we have a committed group of folks, many of you which are in the room today, or maybe, should I say everyone that's in the room today, because I think this panel this morning is preaching to the choir, but we do have a group of folks that's committed, and some at very high levels. We have had governors who have led us, and with Governor Perdue took the initiative to apply and make North Carolina bring in an early childhood advisory council, which then led to us applying for early childhood challenge grant that kind of put us on the forefront out there to say that North Carolina is the leader in this whole country. We ranked #1 in this grant challenge and got $70 million to help improve our system, and we can talk more about that later. But to continue to move forward, as the other panelists have said, we've got to find champions for this cause, be they in your local churches, local civic groups, businesses, communities, and so forth. People have got to take the time to be committed to this cause, to learn about it, and understand that return on investment. That made it easy for me, being a banker when I was first introduced to this. The numbers make sense. But as a parent, now grandparent, and looking back at my early childhood, I grew up in that area where the community raised the child. If I did something two blocks down the street, it got back home before I did, if I was doing something wrong. But that's not necessarily the case in this environment we live in today. It takes a little bit more, because we're so not connected as a community and individuals as we were back in the day. So we have to do a little bit differently. So that means we have to have forums like this, give people information through social media or whatever it may be, to keep them informed, and I think doing that we'll continue to move this effort forward and we'll meet all our challenges.
Let's be a little, before you pass on the microphone, I want to be a little bit more specific. So we've got a group here that obviously care about this issue. I want to know what it's good to get them educated, but where could we go? What are some specific things that this community can do? So, for example, you've got first2000days.org, which is a website that they can check out that's got a lot of good information. But what are some other very specific things that you want people walking away from this conversation with that they may be able to go and take action on, or at least talk to others about?
Okay. Well, the simplest thing I start with is your legislators, the people who vote on these issues. You either know them directly or indirectly through friends, and we are in the middle, we're on the very edge of the election season right now. So the candidate that you've chosen to vote for, what is their position on early childhood? You know, do they even talk about it? If they don't have a position, then you need to educate them on that position. I think once people know and understand, I think their commitment kind of goes up exponentially, because I don't think anyone's against children. It's just that they haven't taken the time to be for children.
Well, I mean, these are priorities, so it depends on where you prioritize it. But I've been told, for example, that this next legislative session, though it's the long session, they're already gearing it to be one of the shortest legislative sessions that they will have had, in part because there's anticipation that we will have, for the very first time in North Carolina's history, a Republican governor, a Republican Senate, and a Republican House. And so this legislation agenda is going to be set come November 15th, going into the legislative session on January 30th. What are the prospects for early childhood education in that conversation? Are people going to be coming out, taking a swing at it? Is it going to be on the table? Where's it going? Do you have a sense of that?
We just came out of the most recent legislative session with Smart Start on the table to be eliminated. Again, I say to you that we have a dedicated team of people across the state of North Carolina who lobby the legislature, who will go walk the halls, knock on those doors, and we were able to accomplish that not happening. We were able to even get a little funding, extra funding. The election, my understanding, is November the 6th. So you have a little time to ask those people that you're going to vote for, are you going to make children a priority? If the answer is no, I hope you know what to do. Because if you wait until they get in to ask the question, you might be a little disappointed. Myself, again, having seen and having been involved in past actions to approach the legislature, to approach business people about investing in what we do, I guess I'm just not scared. I mean, you know, we've been there before. So the battle, I think it will be a continuous battle as long as we have economic issues. But we took some cuts when there was a surplus in budget. So, I mean, you got to battle and fight for the kids. So.
Yeah, and just by way of real context, and I want to pass it on to Alexander, I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Duggar, to talk about where there have been other best practices in other states. But before we do that, Alexander, if you can chime in a little bit more too on this from a legislative perspective. I want to make sure that people are feeling the sense of urgency here, because I think this is a critical time, and if we don't come out swinging, and we, you know, this is great, we don't want to sing Kumbaya so much, because I think we've got to recognize the fact that there's some real challenges.
Yeah, and I think you're right in the sense that, you know, things are going to move quickly, depending on, but things will move quickly. There will be a sense of a mandate to continue to move in the direction that's been moved in. We already know that part of
but direction, that direction specifically being
cuts.
Further cuts. Further disinvestment. Further
disinvestment. And I think the thing that we know about the conversation is that part of this conversation next year is going to continue, I think, eroding the idea that Dr. Duggar put out there of this architecture of our civic connections, and the idea that our government and our budget and our taxes that we pay in are our collective investment to connect and build something positive together. We know discussions of revenue reform are on the table. They're being developed as we speak, and the outcome of those proposals will have an impact on whether North Carolina has adequate investment for many things, including early childhood. So I feel a very real sense of urgency, a really clear sense that over the next 2 months, our mandate as a community of folks who care about children in the state is to have conversations with 10 other people and build this movement as quickly as we can, so that at the moment that we know there is threat, We can call up 10 friends and say, let's go down to the legislature and let's walk the halls, as you said. Let's organize events in our community. Let's show the face of the children who benefit from these programs. I think we need to prepare now for that activity in January.
So now, Dr. Duggar, I want to bring it to you. We have, as you've pointed out, since 1993, been a national leader in terms of this work. And just by way of context, not a single other state, every single state in the country has visited North Carolina, understand what to do with early childhood education. Every single state in the country has visited this state. The other thing is that the Kellogg Foundation has now put money into North Carolina to help replicate North Carolina's program in 11 other states. So we are regularly recognized as one of the national leaders in this conversation, and again, just from a sense of urgency perspective, we're about to lose that position, I think, very clearly. So what states have been able to successfully navigate a bipartisan direction where you've got a mobilized grassroots base that's pushing hard on good legislative action which ensures the appropriate amount of investment in these important issues? And if you could speak with some specificity, are there a couple of states we should be looking to that we could emulate, and what are some things that we should be doing right here based upon those national best practices?
Well, there's one state, and that's Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania 4 years ago faced the same kind of budget cuts, literally the elimination of their pre-K counts program. Business sector had been organized for some time. They have a early childhood investment commission. It was chaired at the time by the current co-chair of the advisory board of Ready Nation. And what they did as a business community was to push back on the legislature. They completely stopped the cuts and, in fact, increased the funding. Now, what we know is that that was the easy part. And we can take some heart in that we get tougher with challenges. What's happening across the board is making us improve our game. We have to understand what we're doing. We have to do it better for kids and for advocacy. But the reality is that, to give you an idea of what how bad it can get, just north of you is a state called Virginia. And that state has a lot of promising aspects to it. But it did not even apply for the early childhood Race to the Top grant. Didn't even apply. You applied by virtue of your 30-year history. Really, I think Jim Hunt represented the development of an idea. So really what was happening in North Carolina was actually happening before Jim Hunt got elected. So you had the 80s, so to speak, and the 90s, and the early 2000s. You've had like 3 decades of commitment to early childhood. And what Michael will tell you is that markets fall 3 times faster than they rise. Look at any stock chart, look at any market, doesn't matter. Labor market, oil market, stock market, doesn't matter. It takes about 3 decades to go up and then 1 decade to fall, or it takes 3 weeks to go up and 1 week to fall. But markets fall about 3 times faster than they rise. So all that North Carolina has built up can crash over a period of about 10 years. In Northern Virginia, we've already seen that begin. What's happening elsewhere in the country is that our people are looking through the current set of advocacy tools and efforts. They're looking through and asking questions like, how can we shape politics in the future? A statistic. There are about 600,000 people in every congressional district. Also, in every congressional district, there are about 1,000 child service sites, everything from obstetricians' offices to high schools. And with respect to every one of those sites, there are at least 100 people who are directly or indirectly dependent on that site, whether they provide computer services, basic cleaning services, transportation, as well as obstetricians, teachers, and parents, and the rest. About 100 people for each site. That means that in every district, there are 100,000 people for whom kids matter a lot. And what we know in every election, you only need half of those people to make a congressional election for the U.S. House of Representatives go one way or the other. And if you get 50,000 people in a district that are committed, that understand that they're part of the youth human capital sector and that what these legislators are voting on makes a difference to them, and you get them politically active, you can shape the U.S. House of Representatives to make it a kids first House. Forget about Democrats, forget about Republicans, just make it kids first. The same thing is true in Virginia, and the same thing is true in North Carolina. In Colorado, they are thinking about things they have to do to put 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people from the early care and generally conception to age 18 sector on the steps of state legislatures. In other words, taking everything you're doing one step further. So when Mike walks in and talks to the head of the Speaker of the House of Representatives in North Carolina, what he says has absolute impact because there are 5,000 people sitting on the State House steps saying that what he's saying is absolutely correct. We don't have an economic future in North Carolina unless we're investing in kids and particularly investing conception to age 5. So what we find is, Chris, is that people are beginning to think through what we're now doing and realizing that the struggle is going to get much, much more difficult in the years to come. They're beginning to plan and think through and get these kinds of conversations started so that when it becomes necessary, it's not a new idea. We've already been talking about it for a few years, about why it is that business and the child care and education sector have to work together to keep this economy strong.
So that is a great segue to Patrick. So I'm going to bring it into Patrick, which is, so you have a couple of different hats, 3 hats specifically, as a father, as a board member of Durham Partners for Children, but also on government affairs for Liberty Mutual and thinking about this business partnership that Dr. Duggar just talked about.
Absolutely. I think it's an excellent point, and really what he's talking about is a coalition. We have to do a better job, specifically here in Durham, to build coalitions. And what better issue to build it around than early childhood education? In any campaign, there are 3 things you have to do. You have to identify, you have to cultivate, and you have to mobilize. The political climate is going to change throughout the years. What we have to do is come up with a sustainable approach to how early childhood education is managed here in this community. This is a great community, and the beauty of this community is our intellectual capital. And so while the public sector has a role in lobbying and advocacy for who you elect is critical, but I think in order for this to be sustainable, we're going to have to build a stronger coalition with the private sector. One of the things that I've also recognized is that when the business community is involved, just as was stated earlier, and has a seat at the table beyond what their business need is, and making the case for education, it does impact the leadership, and the legislators do listen to that. So if we can come together as a community beyond the public sector and the lobbying aspect of our local leaders, and bring in the business community to that conversation, I think that's going to help create a more sustainable early childhood system here in Durham. In addition to that, there are 30,000, roughly 30,000 students here in Durham Public Schools. From birth to 5, we have 25,000 children here in Durham. I mean, that's almost like another school district. I mean, so when you think about those numbers and the impact on what the future looks like, what does Durham 2020 look like? That requires planning. And we're talking about today and yesterday and all the wonderful things that happened in the past, but what does Durham 2020 look like? We expect we had about less than 20% growth here in Durham from 2000 to 2010. From 2010 to 2020, estimates are about 26% growth. Those are children. And what do we do when we can't depend on the public sector to be the voice for what children need?
All right, so you're passing it over to Michael, because I want, Michael, you pick up on this. So this whole idea of a coalition, right? But I don't think, maybe this is me, I'm just learning about this issue myself, but is there a coalition out there? Where do we go from here? I mean, is there a group of business leaders that are stepping up and saying this is going to be a key priority, and do we need to put something like that together?
Well, there used to be one, and it was called the State Chamber of Commerce. I'll leave that there. But I think, you know, that's about a priority shift and a shift in focus. I mean, you know, you talked, it was interesting. You talked earlier about, well, what should we do? And I want to tell a little story because I think it's an interesting anecdote around the concept of, well, what do we do? So I don't know, have any of y'all been through the United Way poverty simulation? It's a pretty fun thing, Frank. I mean, it's an interesting 3 hours to spend. You get the feel of how daunting and how troubled it is, and your awareness is really peaked, right? You come out of there and your awareness is like a 10. Oh man, I'm just hyped up about poverty. And then you go check a voicemail and you're down to an 8, and you check your email and you're down to a 6, and you watch Grey's Anatomy and you're down to a 1, right? And that's kind of how this happens to everyone with these big awareness tweakers we've got. But the interesting thing about that is we had about 100 Durham leaders come do that. You know, the input I got afterwards was, well, what do we do? What do we do now? Well, I don't know. If I knew what we should do about early childhood, I'd go kick Chris off the stage and stand up there and say, here's the plan, this is what we're going to do. The problem is we don't know, but we need a lot of people spending their time on it, right? So we've gotten to this state where we can work on things. I'll write my $1,000 check and I'm done and I'm good, but that's not good enough anymore. We have to be able to invest our mental resources as well as our financial resources in the problems, and that's a really hard thing. Capital Broadcasting has a great United Way program where you can give into the United Way, and we have a huge percentage of people within our company who participate in that. But what I always say is, gosh, imagine if that percentage was willing to invest their mind into problems. Imagine how far we'd be able to get then. And I know it seems daunting, but if we're not willing to spend our time, it's going to be really tough. And one of those big time things is around this concept of who are the leaders, who are the organizations, and who are the businesses who are willing to collaborate to make this difference, right? I mean, that's a real tough agenda item to push, and somebody's got to get around that, and somebody's got to get around that, but there's no question about it. I mean, we can say that all day long. We all understand that. It's just going to come down to leadership and who's going to be willing to step up to push that agenda.
Dr. Duggar, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think that the idea of coalition is critical. Where we've chosen as a strategy is business leader coalitions. It has to be backed up by what the sector is doing, which I emphasized earlier, but now I'm going to talk about what Mike was talking about, which is when you look at all those stars on that map, those are other states that have begun this work of assembling identified business coalitions, business leaders who are organized together to make that commitment of intellectual and personal capital to changing the way the legislature is thinking about investing in kids. This is a process. It involves steps of identification of people and bringing those people together, holding state summits and having speeches and discussions, and in essence to have that debate within the political community to bring forward and enable those people who do see the light this way to begin to work together effectively statewide. What's really important is within this community, there are others in other states who stand ready to get on planes and come here and speak, to give you the best ideas on what has worked in their state. Bill Canary in Alabama, head of the Chamber of Commerce in Alabama, is lit on fire about this, and he would be glad to come here and talk with you about how to build that sort of alternative Chamber of Commerce that evidently North Carolina could benefit from.
But so Harold, pick up on this, okay? So you're on the board of the North Carolina Partnership for Children. So is there such a coalition being formed? Where has the business community been in this fight? And I know I know that there are some key things that we can do for the long game and I don't want to dismiss the long game, but I also don't want to underemphasize the urgency of the now, especially with this new legislative session that's coming up. I mean, this new legislative session, a lot of people are believing will be forget about it takes 3 times longer, it will take, it'll be 10 times faster to be able to tear apart a lot of the progress we've made, potentially, if this heads in the direction that we think it might head. So could you speak to that a little bit in terms of what is happening right now? Is there an advocacy agenda for January 30th to build on the momentum that came out of maybe Saving Smart Start the first time?
I can't speak to a specific group, coalition, agenda. Being on the NCPC board, I guess to me that's an everyday thing. That's what they do. So they're always got the ears to the ground, trying to hear what legislature's headed in what direction and so forth, and then developing strategies to deal with it. One of our greatest challenges, like I said in the last session, was to find those champions for children, and we were able to find enough to get some things through and to keep Smart Start alive. But in a more broader sense, there's things, I think information and education to the general public is the key. So in that vein, there's a new website out there, the first 2,000 days. We're using that, going in that path to maybe come up with some term or terminology where everyone can relate to the importance of that birth to 5 period of time, and focusing on those 2,000 days, which is the average number of days from birth till you could go into kindergarten, and understand how important that is. That's what that website will tell you. Also in mid-November, there will be another website launch called Raising North Carolina. Again, emphasis on getting information out so everyone can raise that level up, so you can do the elevator speech on how important this is for the state and for the country nationally, because if we want to be globally competitive, we have to invest in our kids. There's no substitute.
Yeah, terrific. So I think we've coming to the close here, but I do think that this idea of identify, cultivate, and mobilize, it feels like we're doing a pretty good job on identification and education. We're doing a decent job on cultivation, and we have yet to really mobilize. And I think part of this is, are we in to be able to help to mobilize against some of the challenges that are on the immediate landscape. So I'd love to be able to thank our panel for a very engaging discussion. And remember to go vote. Okay, thank you.